Hello, Mary. It's very nice to see you here.
Thank you. It's good to see you, Katy.
Really great. And thank you for joining another session of Katy and Mary Speaks. This is our debut meeting, and we're here to send our love and wishes to our friends and family in the Ukraine. And we are here as two artists. To anybody who's just joined us, I'm a British songwriter with Polish roots, and Mary is a filmmaker from America. And I shall introduce myself in a little bit. I'll pass over to Mary so she can introduce herself and tell you a little bit about what she does.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm a fan of Katy Carr, so that's first and foremost. But what we have in common is we're both artists with Polish roots. Each of us had a Polish mother, so we have a lot of the crazy childhood experiences in common. And I'm a filmmaker, and my most recent film was about the Polish heroine Irena Sendler. And many people in Poland know who she was. And also there are many people in America because the film was broadcast on PBS in 2011, and it was a national broadcast. It reached thousands and thousands of viewers. And since then, it's been shown in schools and community groups and theaters around the world. And we did a Polish version of it, and we did a PBS version of it. And we also have sort of a director's cut, a special festival version. And if you're interested in seeing this, you can go to Vimeo and or our website, which is irenasendlerfilm.com. But Katy and I were talking, and both of us have such strong feelings about what's going on in Ukraine right now. And we're also both particularly moved by the Polish response. And I think we had a really long conversation about this because in many ways, it's quite natural that Poland should respond in this way. And I know something about this because I had a chance to spend a lot of time with Irena Sendler and her fellow social workers who during World War II, as soon as there was trouble, rallied to help the people who were less fortunate than they were. And I would warrant that now at the border, many of the daughters and granddaughters of that generation of women are there helping the Ukrainians. And Katy has some thoughts on this too.
Well, this year marks the 10th anniversary, actually, of my first album about the Polish Second World War experience called Passport. And this was inspired by the brutal effects of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Agreement in 1939 that happened 7 days actually before the beginning of the Second World War. And I wrote this song, these songs on this album as a retrospective look at the brutal history that Poland had to endure during the Second World War. But unfortunately, with the Ukrainian situation, it's a really harsh reminder for all of us as to a repeat of history. And so what we wanted to do a little bit in this discussion was to have a little chat about expressing our knowledge of the area of Central Europe, because for those people that might not know a lot about that area of the world and the geography, it would be perhaps a good chance now, Mary, what do you think, just to say a little bit about how those borders were quite fluid actually at the beginning of this 20th century. I might pass it to you.
Well, the whole area, the borders have been fluid for hundreds and hundreds of years. And as a matter of fact, we're talking about these things not because you wouldn't learn them in a typical world history class, but so many of my friends and colleagues here in the United States just don't really have much of an understanding of this history. So they don't understand the relationship of countries like Ukraine and countries like Poland to the Soviet Union, because there's a legacy of being dominated, being invaded, having civilian populations moved out of their ancestral homes, sent to the Gulag, and so there's a lot. There are these feelings that both Poles and Ukrainians have inherited, in some ways. But before end of World War I, for example, Poland wasn't even on the map. There were people who spoke Polish, but they had to do so in secret, and there were Polish schools, but they had to go to them discreetly. And people like Marie Curie could not study in her native language in Poland. She had to go to France. Her father was a professor.
Yeah, that's fascinating, though, isn't it? Because, sorry to disturb you on that, but that's quite fascinating, because it actually wasn't just in the 20th century, as you said. It was like hundreds of years. And we're talking about what was the date of the partitions of Poland was in 1795. So Poland didn't actually have her independence till 1918, isn't that right, Mary?
1918, 1919, yeah.
After the First World War. And so you're talking about Marie Curie, and that's the reason why I think a lot of people don't really understand, don't make the connection that actually Poland was erased off the map of Europe for 123 years.
Yeah, and it was divided into three areas. One was Russian, one was Prussian, and the other was Austro-Hungarian. So the different areas of Poland have the legacy of that period of domination. So for example, Warsaw was under the Russians, whereas Krakow was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the same thing was true of Ukraine. Its borders were fluid. It was part of different empires constantly over those hundreds and hundreds of years. And a good person to read about all of this is Timothy Snyder, who kind of was probably one of the first modern historians to start looking at what's going on in that part of the world as these various ethnic groups, and all of them trying to preserve their heritage, hold on to their language, hold on to their culture, hold on to their religion, hold on to their way of life, and how that's caused strife, constant strife. And in the case of an empire like Russia, they lost a lot of the time. So many people don't even know that during World War II, we know that Poland was invaded by the Germans, but we don't know that Poland was also invaded by the Russians, and the country was split between the two aggressors. And the civilians in the areas that were occupied by the Russians experienced a different kind of a fate than the civilians who were in the areas that were occupied by the Germans. And so you can't even characterize you can't even talk about a Polish experience of World War II, because it depends on where you lived in Poland and who you were.
People like you mentioned, like Marie Skłodowska-Curie, who lived in France. She was actually an exiled Pole at that point, but she was very patriotic to her country, because she actually, as you were, sorry to disturb you, just
no,
but with her great discovery of polonium, carrying that patriotism of Poland through into her work, and taking it to that Nobel Prize notoriety, taking her Polishness to that level of acceptance around the world. And I think her story remains obscure as well. Not many people associate her with her Polish roots. Even when films are made about her, they don't address that very deep connection with her country. Her daughter actually made a beautiful film, which was dedicated to her. But she is definitely an example of somebody that had to, travel away from her country. And I suppose that is probably where Polish hospitality comes from. Where does it come from? Why are 2 million refugees now in Poland? Mary, what do you think? Why do you think that, the Poles are so open-armed to these poor refugees who've had to leave their homes and run away from an aggressor like Russia?
Well, I think because, the most obvious reason is they have a palpable experience of being, occupied and of their country being taken away by various totalitarian dictator regimes. And so they understand how horrible it is for women and children in particular. But I also think it comes from the Catholic tradition in Poland, and there's a whole custom, whenever the Christmas table is set in a Polish home, there's always an empty place left for a guest, because for centuries, Poles believed that they really believed that Jesus could come to their house and sit down at the table. And there's a saying in Polish, I don't know how you say it in Polish, but in English, my mother used to say, when a guest is here, God is here. So you open your homes, you open your home to people who don't have enough, who have less than you. And there's a sort of a tradition of charity that is part of the kind of the old-fashioned traditional Polish culture. And I know that I learned it. I'm sure you got a taste of it once in a while, Katy, from your mother. So
yes, always. And the table was always fully laden whenever a guest came to the house, and my mother would go to great extensive efforts to put a display of either hams or cold meats or potato salad on the table or bread. The Poles are extremely hospitable and very welcoming to guests. But in this particular situation, it has really opened our eyes to the real depth of this hospitality, because people are opening their homes and having people from a war zone, complete strangers, live in their houses, which is absolutely remarkable and commendable. I don't think anywhere in history has a country accepted 2 million refugees within a period of a few weeks. It seems to be one of the most huge mass migrations in Europe of people. I must be for centuries. And it's a desperate situation. And that's why we're talking today, because we, as the Polish community, we have our friends, we have our family in Ukraine, we have connections with the Ukrainian territory, because obviously before the Second World War, a huge part of Poland was actually now in Ukraine, because for anybody who knows about the Yalta Conference, that was February 1945, when the big three, Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin, they mapped out the borders of Poland, and they basically gave Stalin exactly what he wanted, which was 300-kilometer tracts of land off Poland's eastern border. So the whole country had to shift. And I suppose this 2 million migration of people right now within this month is matching the levels of migration of the Poles from the eastern borders of Poland when they had to migrate to the west of Poland, and Germany had to shift west. So it's a difficult thing without a map to show everybody. I should actually find a map here to show everybody. I wonder if I have something. But yeah, Poland literally shifted west, and Stalin and his Cold War empires sucked up the states, and to the poor allied country of Poland post Second World War, which was never a communist state. It had been sold down the river, if you like, and became a satellite state of the Soviet Union, which had its own brutality and its own horror to face, because Poland never had a victory day. And so for the next 50 years, entered a new reign of terror. So I think the people in Poland, Mary, don't you agree that they really understand what a reign of terror is?
Absolutely. And you know, this hospitality is Polish hospitality, this embracing of the refugees, but it's also a form of resistance. And I think two things are going on. You know, clearly Poland feels like they're next if the world isn't careful about all of this, but also they're just horrified that in this modern day, you know, that the invasion that's going on right now should be seen as a solution, you know, to things that could be worked out in so many different ways. And that 2 million number is interesting because that's about the number of Poles who in 1941 were rounded up, marched out of their houses by Russian soldiers, put on cattle cars and sent to the Gulag.
Could you explain to people who don't actually know what a gulag is and where the gulags are? Because when we say that, you know, people were taken from the eastern border of Poland, we kind of had to backtrack a little bit to the 17th of September 1939, because most people only know about the first invasion, which was the 1st of September 1939 by the Germans. But due to this Molotov-Ribbentrop agreement, Poland had been split in two, if you like, between Germany and the Soviet Union, and it hadn't even been at the splitting up table. So in effect, it's a grand theft of a country, one side to Germany, one side to the Soviet Union. And so when you talk about the gulags, it would just be...
Well, this is like parts of Siberia that were so remote that nothing could get to them, and they were freezing, and people were living in these camps, and they were made to do slave labor, and many of them died or starved to death. But the thing about this particular deportation is it was completely different than the criteria used for determining that people were enemies of the state, you know, and potential enemies, potential bandits, and therefore needed to be rounded up and sent and interred, were the Russian system was completely different than the German system. So a person who was a gamekeeper, for example, was considered a threat to the Russian Empire because they knew the land, or anybody who owned property or owned a business was considered to be a threat because they obviously would, their values and their principles and their way of doing business was counter to the sort of Leninist Marxist collectivization approach that Russia was taking at the time. So they were considered to be enemies. So these were very, a lot of these people who were rounded up and sent to Siberia were very property owners. They were very well-educated people. Many of the civilians were the wives of officers who were died mysteriously in the Katyn forest. Katy, you can talk about that, but those people were in these labor camps in Siberia, freezing to death. And then all of a sudden in 1941, Russia changed sides and allied with the U.S. and gave those people amnesty. But where were they going to go? They had to trek. And so they have a palpable experience of being refugees and being embraced by different communities. And it wasn't the communities that you would think of. It wasn't the countries that you would normally think of that gave these refugees from Siberia a place to live and a warm, a bowl of soup and a warm bed to sleep in. It was Iraq. It was Mexico. It was parts of Africa. It was India. There were communities of these Polish people throughout the war in all of these different locations. It's embarrassing to say this, but the United States refused to take those refugees.
But let's backtrack a little bit to the Gulags, because the Gulags was a concentration camp system, a white slave trade for Stalin. And there were over 3,000 of these camps over the Siberian region, and temperatures could soar down to -50. So could you imagine -50? People who I've met who've survived Siberia have told me that even if they touch their nose or they touch their lips, it could fall off. And you know, when you think of the Gulags, there is no museum. There is no museum because Putin hasn't allowed a museum to be built. So the victims of all these Gulags, and we're not just talking about Poles from 1940 February who were transported, we're talking about over 123 years of this, because there obviously, it wasn't just the Second World War where people were being transported. They were being transported for over 200 years to the Gulags. And Stalin really connected with the Gulags because he was a bandit and a gangster. And by the age of 18, he'd murdered a person, and he'd been in Siberia 4 times or 3 times. And a lot of people don't understand his background as a brutal gangster. And so for him, it was a way of teaching people that they should go on a holiday. And when you speak to a lot of Siberian survivors, they have this very dark humor about saying we went on a holiday. But it was
right.
Yeah, do you know this, don't you?
Or it's like and after the war, we can further talk about this because but after the war, Poles who returned to Poland from slave labor camps in Germany, who were patriots and maybe were aligned with an momentum to make Poland a free and independent country. So they were considered to be enemies by the state, by the new occupying Russians. They were sent to these camps to be, quote unquote, rehabilitated. It was like rehab. That's sort of the way it was referred to. And one of the reasons we don't know a lot about this is because all this history was suppressed. It was written out of history books in the Soviet Union and in places like Poland during the occupation, until 1989. So we have survivors still alive today who experienced those camps and experienced finally getting out of them. But
it's actually continuing today, which is a frighteningly scary prospect, because there have already been Ukrainian refugees that have been sent to the Gulags already in Russia. Putin has a massive slave system that he has, where people work 17 hours a day in a t-shirt in the middle of winter. I think the singer from Pussy Riot wrote an article about it when she had been in a Gulag. So there's lots of people there. There are roads in Russia made out of human bones from the Gulags. And we're not just talking about Siberia, but there are Gulags everywhere in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, different terrains. So it could be hell building a road in Uzbekistan, like one of my favorite singers, Hanka Ordinovna, a very beautiful, vibrant singer who ended up, you know, shifting stones and building roads at slave labor with her bare hands. And, you know, it caused her so much illness in her body that she died in 1950 of tuberculosis, just too weak to continue. And the effects, the trauma of that. And I did write a song, actually, and I'm going to share the picture that the lovely artist Susan Berghardt made. This is an example of the train Susan made.
Oh, beautiful.
For my song Red Red Rose, and you can see that red star, the symbol of the Soviet Union. This red star is the equivalent of a swastika to those people who have endured the gross trauma of the gulags. And it's just really horrific when we see people wearing hats with the red star. You know, it provokes a lot of trauma. And I think with this Ukrainian war situation, the Poles really link with this, because not only have they, every single person in Poland knows somebody who was either in a German concentration camp, one of their family members, or a family member that had been transported to the gulags. And I think the world really needs to understand this ancestral trauma. And you know, this hospitality comes from a very beautiful side of the Polish culture that was suppressed for many, many years by the Cold War, because people were starving in the Cold War. It wasn't that it was a joy to live there. People actually had no food. People were starving in Poland during the Cold War. Children were dying of starvation. It was a horror, and something that must never be repeated again. And that's why Poles, I think, really feel passionately that they don't want to border with Russia. They want to border with Ukraine. They don't want Russia on their doorstep. Unfortunately, the dictatorship of the Belarus is actually on the Polish border. We've seen some of that in the news, haven't we, Mary? But, you know, I wonder, yeah, you know, it's a deep,
yeah, I think it you know, what you're talking about also, it explains the terror of the Russian people to, and yet we still see news footage of them protesting. But do you know how risky it is for them to protest? You know, for them to speak out in any way, they can get 15 years in prison for putting something on a Instagram post, or you know, it explains a lot, and explains the terror of these soldiers, these Russian soldiers, being kind of thrown at this war like cannon fodder. And that's happened in World War II.
Obviously, some of them are in that bracket, but a majority of them now, according to Putin today, 1,000 mercenaries are coming, and we are hearing the first reports of rape coming from the area of Ukraine. Ukrainian women have been raped by the Russian soldiers. It's a horror, and it's the cost of war. Unfortunately, every single Polish woman in Poland post Second World War had that threat of rape by a Russian soldier, or was raped, and it is absolutely horrific. And, you know, our hearts are going out and our prayers are going out to those very, very vulnerable people that are being preyed upon by these mercenaries and these bandits.
Yeah, we feel very strongly about it. And Katy has been writing amazing songs, and a few of them she's been singing, but she's got a whole vault full of amazing lyrics, and hopefully she'll be coming out with some kind of an album soon, because I've heard a little taste of it. But since I'm here, will you please play one of your songs for us, for our Ukrainian friends?
What should we play? Shall I play some folk song, or should I play something that I've written? What do you think I should play? Just grab my ukulele here.
What's your favorite?
Well, I've been playing well, there's so many of them. Let's have a think. Well, something in Polish, since we're talking about Polish, maybe there is this Ukrainian folk song that I didn't write, but it was a beautiful song that the Polish soldiers in the Polish-Soviet War, 1919 to 1921, in which they won against the Bolsheviks, and they had a battle called the Battle of Warsaw, or the Miracle on the Vistula. And this song, Hey Sokoły, tells the story of a Ukrainian girl who has to say goodbye to her Cossack for the last time, and he has to make it over the border, and he's worried that he's not going to come home to see her again. And she's singing, you know, hey Sokoły, like, please falcons, don't get the little sparrow. She has to like fly and let the bells ring really loudly so that the sparrow makes it. And the last verse is just really sad, because he's saying, if he die, you know, give me wine, and if I die, please bury me in the green of Ukraine again. Obviously, you know, this is a huge song, and when you have a dictatorship or totalitarianism, the culture of the country is diminished by the invading force. So this beautiful song was diminished by the Communist Party after the Second World War, and was the totalitarian Communist Party regime, and people diminished it to just a drinking song, but it isn't actually just a drinking song. It's actually a wonderful
love song.
Yeah, a love song. So gosh, it's a bit out of tune, so I've just got to tune it up. You can have a chat for a minute. Sorry, hopefully it comes on my tuner here. It is.
By the way, if you're in the UK, watch Katy's website, because she's appearing in various venues to help raise money for the Ukrainian refugees, and she sings some of these songs live, and I'm sure it's always fun to go to one of these events, so make sure you go see her live.
We're trying to get money for the Motorola 4400s. If anybody has some spare £7,500, we've got 50 sets that we need to buy.
Yeah.
You want to just let us know, and I will get these handsets straight over to the Ukraine for evacuation purposes. Hej, tam gdzieś na czarnej wodzie siada na kon kozak młody. Ciule żegna się z dziewczyną, jeszcze ciule z Ukrainą. Hej, 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 sokoły, umijajcie góry, lasy, pole, doły, dzwoń, 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 dzwoneczku, mój stepowy skowroneczku. Hej, 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 sokoły, umijajcie góry, lasy, pole, doły, dzwoń, 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 dzwoneczku, mój stepowy dzwon, dzwon, dzwon. Wiele dziewczyn jest na świecie, lecz najwięcej w Ukrainie, a me serce tam zostało przy kochanej mej dziewczynie. Hej, 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 sokoły, umijajcie góry, lasy, pole, doły, dzwoń, 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 dzwoneczku, mój stepowy skowroneczku. Hej, 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 sokoły, umijajcie góry, lasy, pole, doły, dzwoń, 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 dzwoneczku, mój stepowy dzwon, dzwon, dzwon. Wiele dziewczyn jest na świecie, lecz najwięcej w Ukrainie, a me serce tam zostało przy kochanej mej dziewczynie. Hej, 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 sokoły, umijajcie góry, lasy, pole, doły, dzwoń, 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 dzwoneczku, mój stepowy skowroneczku. Hej, 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 sokoły, umijajcie góry, lasy, pole, doły, dzwoń, 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 dzwoneczku, mój stepowy dzwon, dzwon, dzwon. Żal, żal za dziewczyną, za zieloną Ukrainą. Żal, żal me serce płacze i się więcej nie zobaczę. Hej, 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 sokoły, umijajcie góry, lasy, pole, doły, swoim, swoim, swoim słoneczku, mój stepowy słowroneczku. Hej, 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 sokoły, umijajcie góry, lasy, pole, doły, swoim, swoim, swoim słoneczku, mój stepowy dzwon, dzwon, dzwon. Wina, 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 wina dajcie, a jak umrę, pochowajcie na zielonej Ukrainie, przy kochanej mej dziewczynie. Hej, 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 sokoły, umijajcie góry, lasy, pole, doły, swoim, swoim, swoim słoneczku, mój stepowy skowroneczku. Hej, 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 sokoły, umijajcie góry, lasy, pole, doły, swoim, swoim, swoim słoneczku, mój stepowy dzwon, dzwon, dzwon. Mój stepowy dzwon, dzwon, dzwon. That's Hey
I
Sokoły.
love that song, Katy. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've been humming it ever since I first heard it. It's
Yeah.
wonderful.
It has really strong emotions for the people in Ukraine, because it actually is a Ukrainian Polish song in a way, you know, because it's and they know the lyrics in Ukrainian, and it's just be a real dream to be able to sing it with some Ukrainian singers. So if anybody wants to
Beautiful.
sing it, let us know. So well, we're coming to the end of this part of our discussion. We've got several things we would like to discuss more, but thank you so much for joining us, Mary. And
Thank you. Where's the Paddington Bear today? I understand there's a Ukrainian Paddington Bear.
There's a little one here.
There he is. Does he have a message for our friends in Ukraine?
He does a little bit. I think I might have to pull it off him, actually. He does have a message. Can you read it, Mary?
Be strong, my Ukrainian friends. I am by your side always. Paddington is by your side.
Yeah, Paddington. And he's got a very special badge from the Ukrainian Centre in London there. Stand with Ukraine. And he's he's been standing here all the way through.
I hear he's been trucking around Hampstead Heath as well.
He has, actually. He's been around
Polish Wellingtons. Yeah.
And you're at Buckingham Palace soon, aren't you? To see the Queen. Yeah, he's a very London bear, but you know, just want to make sure that see his Polish red boots here. And he's got a badge here. I love Poland. There you go. So yeah, he's definitely a big supporter of all people in Ukraine and those who've had to leave their country.
All those who've had to leave their homes.
Yeah.
Paddington feels for you, and he's thinking of you, and he's with you.
Yeah, and he supports everybody who supports Ukraine, because Ukraine are our friends and we love them and our family. So we're sending big, big hugs to everybody. And thank you so much, Mary, for joining us today.
Thank you, Katy.
Yeah. we'll come back and we'll do another discussion. We've got lots to
more songs, more thoughts, and maybe some stories about our Polish mothers, huh?
Yeah, that would be a good idea, actually. Yeah, if anybody wants to leave any comments like about some topics you think we might want to investigate, let us know and we will. Mary and Katy speaks.
Huh?
Mary and Katy speaks, and yeah, go and check out Mary's film, and yeah, more from us soon. But take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. See you soon. Slava Ukraina. Yeah.
Slava Ukraina.
Slava Ukraina. We stand with Ukraine. Always.
Always.
Always. We're with you in our prayers.